So, um, I want you to just imagine an invading army for a second, right? Like
Yeah.
you're expecting this slow, grinding march of a conventional siege.
Right, the typical war of attrition kind of setup.
Exactly. Picture the mud, the miles of razor wire, the endless trenches, and this plodding, highly methodical advance of heavy artillery.
Just a massive logistical nightmare.
Yeah. And you're the enemy commander standing at a bunker, and you're waiting for the first signs of this like monolithic advance. You're expecting a grueling war that's going to take months.
Because that's how it always works, right? That's the textbook.
Right. But instead, the horizon just simply screams. Like, before you can even issue a preliminary order, your flanks are just shattered by thousands of armored warriors.
And they're not marching, I assume.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
They are moving at supersonic speeds. They're riding on these heavily modified jet bikes, completely ignoring all your established battle lines.
Wow.
Yeah, they strike from completely impossible angles, basically laughing as they dismantle your defensive grid. And before the dust even settles, they're just gone.
So no artillery, no slow advance, just...
Just the storm. Literally, that's what we're looking at today.
It is, well, it's the absolute terrifying inversion of everything the enemy has been trained to fight.
Yeah, totally inverted.
Because conventional warfare relies heavily on friction, on the slow, predictable grinding of two massive forces against one another.
Like two huge gears just grinding together.
Exactly. And when you remove that friction entirely and you replace it with pure, unadulterated velocity, the enemy's command and control structures just, well, they simply collapse.
They can't process it. And the crazy part is this isn't just some friend rebel group doing this.
No, not at all.
The text we're diving into today, it's this incredible excerpt called The Way of the Storm, Legacy of Jagatai Khan. It outlines this military vanguard known as the White Scars, or the V Legion.
It's the Fifth Legion, yeah.
Right. And on paper, these guys are Space Marines. They are the Emperor's Angels of Death, which, if you know anything about the lore of this massive dystopian galactic empire we're talking about, those titles carry immense weight.
They absolutely do. They imply an absolute unquestioning loyalty to the system.
Yeah, you expect these heavy power-armored infantry dropping from orbit in perfect synchronized ranks, right?
Yeah.
Like quoting from a religious military doctrine as they land.
You're expecting a highly disciplined, completely uniform wall of muscle and ceramide and, well, dogma.
Dogma is the key word there. But they don't do that.
What's fascinating here is the reality of the V Legion is so profoundly jarring compared to that expectation. I mean, the Imperium is fundamentally built on this deep obsession with standardization.
Because it has to be, right? It's so big.
Exactly. The Empire spans 1,000,000 worlds, and the only way a bureaucracy of that insane scale survives is by making every single thing visible, quantifiable, and controllable.
No surprises allowed.
Right. The ideal Imperial soldier is just an interchangeable cog in an infinitely massive machine.
But the White Scars violently subvert that expectation. I mean, the text describes them the exact same breath as the wild horsemen of the stars.
Which is such a contradiction.
It's a huge contradiction.
Yeah.
They're elusive, they're completely unpredictable, and I think most importantly, they are entirely untouched by the suffocating dogma of the empire they supposedly serve.
Yeah, they're the tip of the spear for literally the most rigid, bureaucratic regime imaginable.
Yet they operate with the fluid, almost chaotic freedom of nomadic hunters.
And that's what's fascinating here is the existential threat this poses, not just to their enemies, but actually to their own commanders.
Wait, really? Their own commanders feel threatened by them.
Oh, absolutely. Think about it. You have this military asset that is undeniably effective, arguably one of the most lethal forces in the entire galaxy, but they completely refuse to be governed by the standard operating procedures.
Oh, I see.
They achieve the state's goals, sure,
Yeah.
but they actively despise the state's methods while doing it.
I mean, if you've ever worked in a massive corporate bureaucracy, the kind where you have to fill out like 3 different forms in triplicate just to get a new office chair.
Oh, yeah, where every single action is dictated by some 10-year-old HR manual.
Exactly. You know exactly what this tension feels like. So I want you to imagine, right in the middle of that bloated corporation, there's a rogue, highly effective startup team.
Operating completely off the books.
Yeah. They never wear suits, they skip every single mandatory synergy meeting, and they just flat out ignore the chain of command. But because they relentlessly, brutally bring in results, upper management can't actually fire them.
They need them too much.
Right.
Yeah.
So instead, management just views them with this intense suspicion and, like, barely concealed hatred.
That corporate analogy is highly functional here, honestly. But we have to scale it up to a galactic war for human survival.
Yeah, just a slight step up in stakes.
Just a bit. I mean, the HR manual in this case is a sacred dogmatic text that literally dictates how millions of soldiers live and die. And that rogue startup team,
Right.
they are a legion of genetically modified super soldiers who are fully capable of burning down an entire solar system.
Okay, let's unpack this from the ground up because we really need to look at exactly where this wild methodology actually comes from.
Yes, the origins are crucial.
Because, frankly, you cannot understand an army that calls itself the Wild Horsemen without first analyzing the physical dirt, or I guess the windswept plains that they ride on.
That's a great point.
The text explicitly links their entire identity to their homeworld, which is called Chogris.
It is a textbook case of extreme environmental determinism.
Break that down for us. What does that mean in this context?
Well, you simply do not get a culture that prizes speed and fluidity above all else from a world of, say, dense urban hives or impassable mountain ranges, right?
Right. The geography shapes the mindset.
Exactly. And the source material describes Chogoris as this world of endless windswept plains and incredibly fierce storms. That physical geography is the anvil upon which their entire collective psychology is forged.
So let's think about the physics and sociology of that for a second.
Hmm.
If you live on an endless plain and fierce storms can just materialize out of nowhere, you can't build static structures.
It's impossible. Like, if you build a massive stone fortress, you are essentially just painting a giant target on yourself for the elements or, for rival nomadic tribes. You can't out-armor a supercell storm.
Precisely. You have to outrun it.
Yeah.
On Chogoris, static defense is literally a death sentence.
Wow.
The environment actively punishes anyone who tries to draw a line in the dirt and just hold it. Instead, the world rewards constant fluid movement.
So survival dictates that you have to be able to pack up your entire civilization and move it at a moment's notice.
Exactly. Your wealth and your power aren't measured in the height of your walls. They're measured in the speed of your mounts.
So they're culturally hardwired for mobility long before they ever put on a suit of power armor.
Deeply hardwired, yeah.
And the text introduces their primarch, Jagatai Khan, as the absolute embodiment of this philosophy. He's like the central anchor for this planetary identity.
He is the apex of that entire culture.
But wait, okay, let's unpack this. I have to push back on this a little bit.
Sure. I understand the cultural background,
Yeah.
but we are talking about space marines here. These aren't just regular guys recruited from a local village, right?
No, they go through a horrific process.
Exactly. They undergo extreme genetic modification, intense psycho-indoctrination, and decades of training just to become the Emperor's Angels of Death.
It's a brutal transformation.
So a massive totalitarian military like the Imperium usually strips away all of that individuality. They shave your head, give you a serial number, break down your past identity, and rebuild you as a uniform weapon.
That is the standard imperial procedure, yes.
So how on earth does a localized nomadic culture survive that kind of industrial-scale brainwashing?
That is a brilliant question, and it really strikes at the absolute core of the White Scar's unique nature.
Because it shouldn't be possible, right?
Well, the text actually gives us the key to this. It describes them as a brotherhood forged in the howling winds. The Imperium certainly tries to strip away their humanity. They try to impose the standard imperial dogma on these recruits. But the shared trauma, the deeply ingrained philosophy of those Chogorian plains acts as an impenetrable cultural shield.
A cultural shield against their own empire's indoctrination.
Yes, exactly.
How does that actually work in practice, though?
Think about it physiologically and psychologically. When a Chogorian initiate undergoes this torturous process of becoming a space marine, the pain and the hypnotherapy are supposed to rewrite their brain entirely.
Erase the slate, basically.
Right. But the teachings of Jagatai Khan, this philosophy of the wind, the plains, the storm, it's so fundamentally rooted in their collective psyche that it just overrides the imperial conditioning.
Oh, wow. So it's stronger than the brainwashing.
Yes. The Imperium tries to teach them rigid obedience to this distant emperor sitting on a golden throne. But Chogorian culture teaches them immediate, visceral loyalty to the warrior riding right next to them.
The guy they actually bleed with.
Precisely. The Brotherhood of the Plains outcompetes the bureaucracy of the stars.
That's an amazing way to put it. So when they put on the ceramite armor and pick up their bolters, they aren't really becoming Imperial soldiers.
Not in their hearts, no.
They're just becoming faster, more lethal Chogorians. They literally bring the plains with them into the stars.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is a staggering failure of the Imperial machine.
Because the machine thinks it's working.
Right. The Imperium thinks it is creating these standard issue weapons, but it's actually just supercharging a pre-existing, deeply independent warrior culture.
They're just giving them better gear to be more themselves.
Exactly. The White Scars play along with the broader structure just enough to get the weapons and the ships, but internally, their soul belongs entirely to Chogoris.
Which naturally brings us to how this soul translates into actual warfare. Because it isn't just that they like to go fast, right?
No, it's a very specific doctrine.
It's a highly codified, rigid, yet paradoxically completely free belief system that the text calls the way of the storm.
A great title.
It is. And the sources break this down into 3 foundational pillars.
Right.
Speed, freedom, and the thrill of the hunt.
Right.
Now, speed and freedom, those are obvious byproducts of growing up on the windswept plains. But it's this third pillar, the thrill of the hunt, where I think the text introduces a massive, almost absurd tactical paradox.
Oh, it is arguably the single most controversial aspect of their doctrine among other Imperial commanders.
Because the text states, and this is a direct concept from the source, that the White Scars value the moment of the kill above all tactical considerations.
Which is a wild statement.
It sounds like pure madness. From a military perspective, valuing the thrill of the kill over the tactical reality of the battlefield, that sounds like a recipe for getting your entire armies surrounded and slaughtered.
It absolutely does. I mean, to a conventional, dogmatic commander, prioritizing a thrill over a tactic is straight-up dereliction of duty.
Right, yeah.
It implies a lack of discipline. It implies that the soldiers are just these blood-crazed barbarians who lose their minds the second they see the enemy.
I have to play devil's advocate here. You're fighting these highly advanced alien races that have been conducting warfare for millions of years.
Or chaotic entities that literally warp reality.
Exactly.
Right.
If you throw your tactical playbook out the window because you're chasing the adrenaline high of the moment of the kill, how are you not immediately wiped out?
It's a fair point.
You cannot out-instinct an orbital bombardment or like a mathematically perfect alien crossfire. There has to be a mechanical framework behind this thrill, right?
You are absolutely correct to challenge that, because the word thrill in a civilian context implies reckless abandon, like a joyride.
Yeah, exactly. Just doing whatever you want.
But we have to redefine what thrill means to a superhuman warrior who is steeped in the way of the storm. This isn't recklessness. This raises an important question about the nature of intuition in warfare.
Okay.
For the White Scars, the thrill is the tactic.
Explain the mechanics of that. How does an emotion replace a strategy?
It's about the flow state, but weaponized to a superhuman degree.
The flow state, like an athlete.
Exactly. When the text says they value the kill over tactical considerations, it means they are actively rejecting plotting, calculated, static strategy.
Oh, I see.
They aren't turning off their brains at all. They're actually bypassing the slow, conscious part of the brain that requires a rigid plan to function.
Because a conventional army sees a battlefield as a chessboard.
Right. You move a pawn, you wait for the enemy to react, you move a knight.
It's turn-based, and it requires constant communication up and down a huge chain of command. Like, sir, we have encountered resistance at Sector 4, requesting orders.
Exactly. Which creates lag.
Right. The ODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. It takes time.
Time they don't want to spend. The White Scars do not wait for orders. When they give themselves over to the thrill of the hunt, they enter the state of overwhelming synchronized momentum.
Synchronized momentum. That sounds terrifying.
It is. Their intuition is so finely tuned by decades of surviving the plains and practicing the way of the storm that they can read the microcurrents of a battlefield instantly.
Without saying a word.
Exactly. They don't need a commander on a radio to tell them the enemy flank is weak. 100 White Scars will simultaneously sense that weakness, communicate purely through their shared momentum, and exploit it in a fraction of a second.
That's wow. Think of standard Imperial Space Marines like a broadsword.
Right.
A broadsword is heavy. It requires a massive wind-up, and it's designed to just cleave through heavy armor using sheer brutal force.
Very effective, but very slow.
Right. But the White Scars don't operate like a broadsword. They operate like a surgical scalpel that's attached to a high-speed centrifuge.
Oh, I like that.
It's not about the weight of the blow. It's about the sheer, unanswerable velocity and the angle of the strike. The enemy is looking for the wind-up, but the scalpel is already cutting before their brain even registers the movement.
That is a phenomenal analogy. And the centrifuge part is the perfect representation of their momentum. They don't stop to assess the damage they just did.
They just keep spinning.
Right. By the time the enemy's nervous system realizes it's been cut, the White Scars are already 3 miles away, lining up the next pass. They rely on the physical reality that an enemy simply cannot defend against an attack that has no logistical buildup.
But this naturally leads to a massive structural collision course.
Oh, inevitable.
Because a culture that weaponizes intuition, that values freedom above all else, and operates on pure, high-velocity instinct, that is going to violently clash with an empire built entirely on endless bureaucracy.
The friction is unbelievable.
And the text dives right into this friction by looking at how the White Scars organize themselves, or, more accurately, how they flat-out refuse to be organized.
This is where the philosophical differences cross the line into open institutional rebellion.
Yeah. The sources bring up this concept called the Codex Astartes. Now, for those of you listening who might not be super deep into imperial military law, the text describes this codex as a rigid structure that dictates standard company organization.
But we need to really visualize what that means.
Yeah, this isn't just a pamphlet of suggestions, right?
No, this is a multi-volume, exhaustive rulebook. It dictates exactly how many troops should be in a squad, what specific weapons they must carry, how supply lines are maintained, and exactly how to respond to basically every conceivable tactical scenario.
So it's the ultimate leash.
It is the mechanism by which the Imperium ensures its genetically modified super soldiers don't just turn into uncontrollable warlords.
Which is a valid fear.
Very valid. If every chapter across the entire galaxy follows the exact same codex, the central bureaucracy can just plug them into any war zone, predict their exact logistical needs, and ensure their ideological purity. Standardization is control.
And the text is incredibly blunt about this. The White Scars completely reject it.
Completely.
They don't just bend the rules or ask for a cultural exemption form. They look at the foundational text of the imperial military and basically throw it in the trash.
It's amazing.
Instead, the source says they organize into these things called Khanates, led by Khans, and they rely on these really mystic-sounding figures called storm seers.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the logistical reality of rejecting the codex is just staggering.
It's a logistical nightmare for the Imperium.
Exactly. It means the White Scars operate entirely outside the Imperium's established supply chain and command structure.
I really want you to think about how terrifying that must be for the Imperium's high command.
Just put yourself in their shoes.
Yeah, put yourself in the shoes of a Lord General. You have the V Legion in your sector. They're incredibly lethal. They get results. But you have absolutely zero idea how their chain of command works.
It's completely opaque to you.
Right. You send a standard encrypted order down the wire for Company B to hold position at coordinate X. But there is no Company B. There's a Brotherhood of the Blue Hawk, led by a Khan. And that Khan doesn't report back to you. The Khan consults a storm seer to read the atmospheric pressure and the spiritual omens of the wind before deciding if your order is even worth following.
And that introduction of the storm seers is arguably the most radical departure from imperial norms. You mentioned they sound mystic, and they absolutely are, but we need to understand the mechanics of why that specifically terrifies the Imperium.
Because the Imperium has psychics too, right?
Yes, but a standard imperial military force uses rigidly trained, highly monitored psychic individuals like librarians or astropaths who communicate through established, verifiable channels.
They log everything.
Exactly. They leave a paper trail, whether it's psychic or physical.
And a verifiable paper trail is music to a bureaucrat's ears.
It's what they live for. But a storm seer, they practice a shamanistic tradition native to Chagris. They don't use the rigidly defined psychic disciplines of the Imperium at all.
So what do?
They manipulate the elements themselves. They use their abilities to summon localized fogs to mask their approach, or they manipulate barometric pressure to give their jet bikes an aerodynamic edge.
Wait, they change the air pressure just to go faster?
Yes. Or they summon literal lightning strikes. And they don't communicate through secure Vox channels that a general can tap into and monitor.
No paper trail.
None. They communicate through the shared instinctual language of the storm. They are completely invisible to imperial oversight.
Which means the Imperium is literally harboring a sovereign, independent military culture right within its own ranks.
Hiding in plain sight.
Yeah. The White Scars are wearing the Emperor's colors, but they are fighting Jagatai Khan's war.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Having established this rebellious, instinctual, completely opaque structure, we need to look at the physical reality of how this machinery operates when the shooting actually starts.
Right, because their philosophy is fascinating on paper, but it is deeply, horrifyingly lethal in practice.
The text explicitly defines their combat doctrine with one word: speed. They are the absolute masters of the hit and run.
Unmatched in the galaxy.
The sources say they strike the flanks, they strike the rear, and crucially, they retreat before the enemy can even react. But let's go deeper than just saying they are fast.
Let's look at the hardware.
Yes, the arsenal that makes this possible. The text refers to their weaponry as the speed of the storm, calling them tools of the mobile hunter.
You cannot execute a Chogorian hit and run if you are bogged down by conventional armaments.
It just doesn't work.
Right. A standard Space Marine relies on heavy, interlocking fields of fire. They use massive, plotting tanks and heavy weapons teams that have to stop, deploy bipods, calculate trajectories.
Which takes time. And time is the enemy of the storm.
Precisely. So the White Scars just strip all of that away. Their arsenal is completely customized for momentum.
So what does that look like?
We are talking about heavily modified jet bikes and assault transports, where they have likely stripped off layers of heavy ceramite armor just to shave off a fraction of a second in acceleration.
Trading protection for speed.
Exactly. And they trade heavy bolters that require static firing positions for lightweight, high-capacity suppression weapons, things that can be fired accurately while moving at 300 kilometers per hour.
It fundamentally changes the physics of the engagement.
It rewrites the rules.
Like, if an enemy fires an artillery shell at a White Scar formation, by the time the shell reaches the apex of its parabolic arc, the formation is simply not there anymore.
You're gone.
They've completely bypassed the blast radius and are already carving into the actual artillery crew that fired the shot.
And this brings us to the psychological terror they inflict. The text uses a very specific, evocative phrase to describe this. They strike like lightning from a clear sky.
That's a beautiful line. It's poetry, but it's also a literal description of their tactical doctrine.
Yes, and we really have to examine what that means for the enemy's morale. In military history, anticipation is often way worse than the battle itself.
Oh, the waiting.
The waiting is agonizing. The sound of marching boots, the dust clouds forming on the horizon, the preliminary bombardments, all of these give an enemy time to brace themselves.
To dig their heels in.
Right, to dig in and psychologically prepare for violence. But the White Scars deny you that preparation entirely.
Because there is no dust cloud. Because they're moving too fast for the dust to even rise.
Exactly.
And there is no preliminary bombardment because they're their own ordnance.
Exactly. Imagine the sheer, paralyzing paranoia of fighting an enemy like that.
It would drive you crazy.
You're looking at a completely clear sky, a perfectly quiet horizon, and then in the span of maybe 3 seconds, 1,000 armored warriors are suddenly among your ranks, tearing your command structure to absolute pieces.
Out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere. And just as quickly as the violence erupts, it vanishes. The roar of the engines fades away, leaving only the dead.
And a survivor.
Yes, and think about the survivors. They're left standing in a shattered defensive line, completely unharmed, but psychologically broken. Because they realized they were spared not by their own skill or their defenses, but simply because the storm moved on.
You cannot defend against a threat that gives you zero sensory warning. It just collapses the enemy's will to fight.
They dismantle the enemy's psychology before they even dismantle their armor.
It's a brilliant but truly terrifying way to wage war. So we've spent this time establishing how incredibly effective, how culturally rich, and how fiercely free the White Scars are. They are a perfectly adapted organism, right?
Yeah.
Surviving and thriving completely on their own terms.
They're the pinnacle of their own philosophy.
But this is where the source material takes a massive, jarring shift. It doesn't end on a triumphant note celebrating their tactical genius. It takes a deeply dark, really tragic turn.
It does.
It introduces a concept that it literally calls the ultimate horror of this chapter.
Yes. The text transitions very abruptly from celebrating their capabilities to mourning their grim reality, and the reality is that their perfection is their doom.
The tragedy outlined in the text is incredibly stark. It states that their love of freedom is actually their curse.
It's a tragic irony.
The very things that make them so lethally effective, their speed, their reliance on intuition, their total rejection of bureaucratic dogma, those are the exact things that marginalize them within their own empire.
They are too different.
The sources explicitly state they are misunderstood and seen as barbaric and unreliable. by their dogmatic brethren.
Because they cannot be tamed, controlled, or predicted by an algorithm or a codex. And in the eyes of the Imperium, anything that cannot be perfectly controlled is inherently suspicious.
If not outright traitorous.
Exactly.
I really want to dive into the psychology of the Imperium here. What does it reveal about a society, about a massive galaxy-spanning civilization when it looks at its most effective, free-thinking, intuitive defenders and calls them barbaric?
It's very telling.
The text describes the Imperium as suffocating bureaucracy. Let's really analyze what that suffocating bureaucracy is doing in this context.
Well, it reveals an empire that has fundamentally entered a state of terminal decline.
Terminal decline. How so?
Think about an expanding, healthy empire. A healthy system values innovation, right? It values results. It would look at the white scars, see how effectively they dismantle the enemy, and ask, how can we learn from this? How can we adapt this to our other forces?
Right, they want to copy the success.
Exactly. But a decaying empire, an empire obsessed only with maintaining its own fragile, bloated existence, is terrified of innovation.
Because innovation implies change.
Yes. The Imperium doesn't want to learn from the white scars. It wants to quarantine them.
Because innovation implies that the current system is flawed. And in a dogmatic, basically religious bureaucracy, questioning the system isn't just wrong, it's heresy.
Exactly. The Imperium relies entirely on the illusion of absolute control to keep its million worlds from rebelling.
It's all a facade.
A fragile facade. And the white scars pierce that illusion simply by existing.
Oh, I see.
Every time a Khan ignores a direct order from a Lord General and achieves a massive victory anyway, it proves that the General's enormous, complex bureaucracy is completely unnecessary.
And bureaucrats will always seek to destroy anything that proves their own irrelevance.
Every single time.
Think about the last time you were in a soul-crushing environment, maybe a really strict school administration or a super rigid corporate structure.
We've all been there?
You have a goal to accomplish, and you find a brilliant, fast, incredibly efficient way to do it. But instead of being praised for getting it done, you are reprimanded.
Because you didn't use the officially sanctioned template.
Exactly. The administration doesn't care that you succeeded. They only care that you bypass their authority to do it. They punish the innovation just to protect the process.
And that is the exact micro-level equivalent of the macro-level tragedy the white scars face every single day.
It's exhausting.
They are the ultimate innovators in a galaxy that has essentially criminalized original thought.
And the sources explicitly call them the embodiment of the Imperium's forgotten freedom. I just want to let that phrase sink in for a second. Forgotten freedom.
It's a haunting phrase.
The Imperium didn't just lose its freedom by accident. It actively traded it away, century by century, in exchange for security and control.
A bad bargain.
Very bad. And the white scars are this walking, breathing, high-velocity reminder of what humanity used to be before it locked itself inside a bureaucratic prison.
And this is the crux of the ultimate horror. The text calls them a beacon of hope in a galaxy of despair, but it immediately follows that by stating they are a tragic reminder that the Imperium's suffocating bureaucracy has crushed the very spirit it was meant to protect.
Okay, let's explore that paradox then. Why are they still fighting?
It's the million-dollar question.
Right. If they despise the bureaucracy, if they throw the codex in the trash, if they're viewed as barbaric outsiders by the very people they're trying to save, why don't they just leave?
Just pack up and go home.
Yeah. Why don't they take their fast ships, ride back to Chogoris, and just let the Imperium burn?
Because of the deeply ingrained honor of the Brotherhood that we discussed
The
earlier.
cultural shield.
Exactly. The tragedy isn't just that they are marginalized. The true tragedy is the profound existential conflict of their loyalty. Jagatai Khan gave his oath to the emperor, not to the bureaucracy that followed. And to break that oath would be a fundamental violation of the Chogorian soul. So they are trapped.
By their own honor.
By their own honor.
Yeah.
They are bleeding, dying, and sacrificing their brothers to defend a massive, sprawling regime that fundamentally hates everything they represent.
So they're keeping the walls of the prison secure, even though their entire culture dictates they belong on the open plains.
It's incredibly sad when you look at it that way.
They are the wild horsemen, fighting tooth and nail to protect a society that would genuinely prefer to see them chained to a desk, filling out requisition forms, and following the Codex Astartes to the letter.
It is a mutually parasitic relationship, basically, wrapped in the guise of holy duty.
But the Imperium needs them.
Desperately. The Imperium desperately needs their speed and their lethality to survive against the terrors of the galaxy. It needs the scalpel on the centrifuge, but it violently despises the free will that makes that scalpel so effective in the first place.
Wow.
The Imperium is essentially a rotting carcass held together by red tape, and the white scars are one of the last truly healthy breathing organisms left inside it. And like any failing system, the Imperium treats the healthy organism as a virus.
Man. So what does this all mean? We've covered an immense amount of conceptual and tactical ground today.
We really have.
We started by walking the windswept plains of Chagres, unpacking how an environment of endless horizons and fierce storms forged a brotherhood that physically and psychologically cannot be static.
And we analyzed the way of the storm.
Right, realizing that prioritizing the thrill of the hunt over static tactics isn't recklessness. It is the literal weaponization of a superhuman flow state.
Which led to their organizational rebellion.
Exactly. We looked at the logistical reality of completely rejecting the Codex Astartes, opting instead for sovereign Khanat guided by the elemental magic of storm seers.
Rendering them completely invisible to their own empire's oversight.
And then we visualized the horrifying physics of their combat doctrine. The lightning from a clear sky, the surgical scalpel dismantling the plodding broadsword of conventional warfare.
And finally, we confronted the ultimate horror of their existence.
Yeah, the tragic, inescapable reality of being the last truly free warriors in the galaxy, condemned to serve a suffocating bureaucracy that views their wild spirit as a barbaric curse, rather than the salvation it truly is.
It is an incredibly heavy, deeply fascinating dynamic.
It really changes how you look at the concept of loyalty and freedom in any massive organization.
Absolutely.
We're going to leave the deep dive there for today, but before we wrap up, we want to leave you with a final thought to chew on, something to, roll around in your head the next time you are reading about massive systemic conflicts.
Yes. Think about this paradox based on the tension we've unpacked today. If the white scars truly represent the unbridled spirit and the forgotten freedom of humanity,
Right.
and the Imperium represents a suffocating, rotting bureaucracy that views this freedom as a dangerous, barbaric threat.
Then when the White Scars ride out to brutally slaughter the enemies of the Imperium, are they actually defending humanity?
Oh, man.
Or are they just acting as the incredibly lethal guard dogs for the very system that ultimately wants to extinguish their way of life?
It's a profound question of who they are truly fighting for and whether survival is actually worth the cost of the soul. Thank you for joining us on this custom-tailored deep dive into the legacy of Jagatai Khan.
It's been a great ride.
We hope this extensive exploration gave you a completely new perspective on how environment, culture, and systemic control violently collide. Keep looking for those hidden tensions, the mechanics behind the lore, and those aha moments in your own reading. We will catch you on the next deep dive.